All right, so you're getting a bid for SWPPP. Let's talk about Trackout. There's lots of different ways to control Trackout. Now, when you're looking on your bid line items, it might be called something different depending on the company that's sending you in the proposal. It could be called a Trackout pad, right? Could be called a stabilized construction exit or stabilized construction entrance. Could be called a rock pad. All of these are the same thing. What they mean is something to help mitigate mud or dirt from coming off of your site and getting into the street. Now, there's several different options for the way to do that. The most common one currently in use is to use an aggregate to fill in a 10-foot by 50-foot pad right at the entrance or exit to the site. And then you use aggregate that's between 3 and 9 inches in diameter. And then as the trucks come off the site, that will jostle them and it will try to knock off a lot of the dirt. Now, some of the things to keep in mind with aggregate Trackout pads or aggregate stabilized construction exits is that eventually, especially if it's wet or muddy, or even if it's just dirt, eventually they're going to get filled in and they're not going to work very well. And then you're going to end up spending a lot more money on street sweeping because a lot of that dirt's going to be getting out into the street. So those need to be refreshed. Now, it's recommended that those get refreshed monthly. Sometimes, depending on the weather, you can go a little longer. You can go 6 weeks or you can go 2 months without getting that refreshed. But what you want to look for on your estimate is to see if they're just bidding you for the installation of the track pad or if they're also including cost for refreshing that Trackout pad. Because if they're going to put down the aggregate, it's going to have to be refreshed several times throughout the construction process. And so if you're not adding that in, then it's a cost that's going to come up later on in the construction process that you're not capturing during the initial bid. Now, there are other products that you might see, FODS system that you might see. If you see FODS, that is also a Trackout device. And what those are large, they're 7-foot by 12-foot plastic mats that have, big bumps in them. Now, some reasons why those are used, those end up usually costing initially quite a bit more than the aggregate Trackout pad. But one of the reasons why you'll be seeing them around, and you may have heard of them before, is because over the lifespan of the FODS, they end up being a lot less expensive than if you're doing a gravel Trackout pad. We've calculated it to be about a 6-month time frame. If you have a project that's over about 6 months in length, then the FODS ends up being a cheaper option. Whether you're buying it or you're renting it, it ends up being a cheaper option than the aggregate Trackout pad because of the maintenance that's involved with an aggregate Trackout pad. They also work a lot better in terms of dirt removal. So, you're going to end up spending less money on street sweeping as well. So depending on the size of your project, if your project is a shorter one, then an aggregate Trackout pad might be plenty. You won't have to refresh it that often, and it'll end up being a lot cheaper. For a longer project, you might look for something that is manufactured, like a FODS system or some other system like that, to be able to do that. Some of the things that you might have seen are like cattle guard grates. They're manufactured. They're very similar to the cattle guards that you see, but you put those on a construction site, and it does the same thing. It'll knock off the dirt and the mud. And again, those don't have to be maintained as often as a gravel or an aggregate Trackout pad. For smaller projects, there are also manufactured ones that are made out of like nylon and with bamboo sheets in between. So if you're not using tracked vehicles at all, if you're just using wheeled vehicles, sometimes those can be a really good option because they are very inexpensive. So for smaller projects, that might be something that you see as well. But just keep in mind, if you see anything like a mudmat or a FODS system or a Trackout pad or stabilized construction exit, those all mean the same thing. They're all there for the Trackout control.